The paper felt like a headstone. Heavy. Final. Its crisp edges were sharper than a blade, and the black ink spelled out a death sentence for a legacy that had outlasted empires. Foreclosure. The word was ugly. A brute. It didn't belong here, not in this office where the air still smelled of her grandfather's pipe tobacco and lemon polish, a place where generations of Vances had steered their shipping empire through storms and wars. And now this, a quiet, bloodless end on a Thursday morning. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't sudden. It was a slow bleed, a sickness that had been festering for years, long before the company fell into her hands. But that didn't stop the shame from feeling like a physical weight, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. Her eyes drifted to the oil paintings on the mahogany walls. Ancestors. Stern, proud men with sea salt in their veins and iron in their spines. They stared back, their painted eyes full of judgment, and she could almost hear their disappointed whispers in the unsettling silence of the grand, empty house. To make things worse, the silence was a living thing these days. It crept into every room, a constant reminder of how much was gone, how much she was about to lose. She remembered being a little girl in this very room, her grandfather lifting her onto his lap. He smelled of wool and the ocean. He'd pointed out the window to the harbor, to the massive ships with the proud V of Vance Maritime on their hulls. "That's our heart, Naira," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "As long as they sail, we endure." What would he think of her now? The last of the line, the one who was letting the heart stop beating. She didn't know what scared her more, the failure itself or the terrifying emptiness that would come after. The house would be sold, the ships would be seized, her name, her very identity, would be erased. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She had tried everything, every bank, every investor, every old family friend. The doors had all closed, one by one, with quiet, polite regret. Without warning, her phone buzzed on the polished desk, a violent, jarring sound in the stillness. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. What was the point? But then, a sliver of foolish, desperate hope made her answer. "Ms. Vance?" The voice was smooth, professional, and unfamiliar. "This is she," she managed, her own voice sounding thin. "My name is Elias. I am calling on behalf of an interested party who is aware of your current financial difficulties. He is prepared to offer a solution, a comprehensive one." Naira's breath caught. "A solution? An investor?" A slight pause. "Not an investor, a proprietor. He proposes a full absorption of Vance Maritime's debt, every penny, in exchange for a meeting to discuss the terms of a merger of a different kind." A cold weight settled in her stomach, heavier than the foreclosure notice. This felt different. Dangerous. "Who is your employer?" "His name is Damon Blackwood."
Damon Blackwood watched the city lights ignite one by one, a sprawling galaxy of power and ambition that he commanded from his throne of glass and steel. His penthouse was a sterile fortress, a place of calculated silence, 70 stories above the chaos he had tamed. "The call is made," Elias said, his voice a disembodied presence from the speaker on Damon's desk. "She has the name." "And her reaction?" Damon asked, his eyes never leaving the city below. "Predictable, wary, but desperate. She'll come. She has no other choice." Damon turned from the window. On the massive screen that dominated one wall was a single, still image of Naira Vance. It was a candid shot from a charity event months ago. Her head was tilted, a ghost of a smile on her lips, but her eyes held a quiet fire, a defiant strength that the data points and financial summaries couldn't capture. His wolf, the beast he kept chained in the deepest part of him, stirred with a low, possessive hum. He ignored it. This wasn't about want. This was about necessity. In fact, His position was more precarious than anyone knew. Rivals were circling his corporate empire, smelling weakness because he had no mate, no heir, no clear line of succession. In their primal back-alley world of werewolf politics that hid beneath the sheen of corporate law, an unmated alpha was a temporary king. He needed stability. He needed a queen. Not for love. He'd learned the hard way that love was a liability, a knife you handed to your enemies. But for strategy. He needed her, because her pristine legacy and ancient family name were the perfect shield against his rivals. A Vance, mated to a Blackwood. It would be a union of old power and new, a move so unassailable it would silence the whispers and send the jackals scattering. Thorne is making another move on the European distribution channels, Elias reported, his tone grim. Subtle, but it's him. Let him, Damon said, his voice flat. He's playing checkers. I'm about to overturn the entire board. His gaze went back to the picture of Naira, the defiance in her eyes, the proud set of her jaw. She wouldn't be a simple pawn. He knew that. And maybe that was fate, because a weak mate would have been a different kind of liability. No, he needed someone with a spine of steel. Someone who could stand in the fire beside him and not burn. He just needed to be sure she understood that the fire was all for show. Prepare the contracts, Elias, Damon commanded, and clear my schedule. I want nothing to distract me when our future matriarch arrives. The line went dead, plunging the penthouse back into its familiar, controlled silence. In that moment, Damon felt the weight of his decision. He was about to tie his future to a woman he'd never met, a woman whose life he was about to shatter and then rebuild in his own image. It was a ruthless, necessary move. So why did it feel like the biggest gamble of his life?
Blackwood Industries wasn't a building. It was a monument to power, a shard of black glass that tore at the sky. Walking into the lobby felt like stepping into another world, a cold, silent place where the air hummed with unseen energy and the marble floors reflected a distorted, lesser version of herself. She didn't know what scared her more, the crushing weight of her failure, or the terrifying scale of this man's success. Elias, the man from the phone, met her. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He led her to a private elevator that shot upwards with gut-wrenching speed, the silence between them as thick as the armored glass. The elevator opened directly into an office, or rather, a kingdom. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a dizzying, godlike view of the city. The 4th was a stark canvas of dark gray, and standing in front of it, a silhouette against the world he so clearly owned, was Damon Blackwood. He was inevitable. That was the only word that came to mind. Tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him, with an aura of predatory stillness that made every nerve in her body stand on end. When he turned to face her, her breath hitched. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a startling, intense shade of amber, burning with an intelligence so sharp it felt like it could see right through her. "Ms. Vance," he said. His voice was a low, controlled baritone that resonated in her bones. "Thank you for coming." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Her body moved on instinct. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. She would not be intimidated. "Mr. Blackwood, your man said you had a proposal." "I do," he said, gesturing to 2 severe black leather chairs positioned before a massive obsidian desk. He didn't sit. He prowled around it, a caged panther assessing its prey. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. You are ruined. Your family's name, a name that once commanded respect in this city, is about to become a footnote in bankruptcy filings. You are out of time, and you are out of options." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Cold, factual, cruel. "And you're my only hope?" She shot back, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. A flicker of something. Was it surprise? Respect? Danced in his amber eyes. I am prepared to make all of it disappear. The debt, The foreclosure, the shame. I will fold Vance Maritime into my portfolio, a protected heritage wing of Blackwood Industries. Your family's legacy will be preserved. Your employees will keep their jobs. The Vance name will be secure for generations. It was everything she wanted. A miracle. But then, he continued, and the other shoe dropped. Hard. In return, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming something more primal, you will become my mate. Naira froze. Your mate? You mean wife? He gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. No, not a wife. This is not a proposal of love, Ms. Vance. It is a contract. In my world, power is projected through strength, through unity. A mated alpha is a stable alpha. I require a partner with a flawless pedigree, a respectable public image, and a spine of iron. You, it seems, are uniquely qualified. Her thoughts spun. This was insane. You want to buy me? To put me on display like one of your corporate assets? Precisely, he said without a hint of apology. In public, you will be the adoring, devoted mate. You will attend functions. You will smile for cameras. You will play the part flawlessly. In private, we will be strangers. There will be no emotional entanglement, no romantic pretense. This is a transaction. Your legacy, for your life. You will live in my home, but we will live separate lives. Is that clear?
He watched her process the terms, her mind racing behind those startlingly clear blue eyes. He saw the flicker of horror, the flash of outrage, and then something else. The calculating glint of a survivor. She was everything the dossier had promised, and so much more. This woman had the strength of a queen even if her kingdom was crumbling. The moment their eyes locked, his wolf clawed at the inside of his ribs, a savage, primal beast that wanted to rise and claim what was his. The scent of her, like rain-soaked earth and a hint of defiant lavender, was driving it mad. He had to clench his fists behind his back to stop his hands from reaching for her. Control. It was always about control. Why? She finally asked, her voice trembling slightly, but her gaze was rock steady. A man like you could have anyone. Why me? Why this charade? Because a charade is exactly what I need, he answered, forcing the cold logic to the front, pushing the wolf back down into its cage. The women who would willingly throw themselves at me want something I will never give. My heart, my trust. They are liabilities. You, on the other hand, understand the value of a legacy. You understand duty. You understand sacrifice. You are not looking for a fairy tale. You are looking for a lifeline that makes you reliable. He saw the insult land, saw her flinch as if he'd struck her. Good. He needed her to see this for the cold, hard deal it was. He couldn't afford for her to have any illusions. And what if I refuse? She challenged. Then I walk away, he said simply, his voice a blade of ice. And by this time tomorrow, Vance Maritime will cease to exist. A man named Marcus Thorne, a particularly nasty rival of mine, will likely pick over the carcass of your company for pennies on the dollar, just to spite me. Your family's name will be dragged through the mud. Everything your grandfather built will be turned to ash. He let the words hang in the air, a death sentence he was offering to commute. He could see the war raging inside her pride versus her duty. It was a battle he knew she couldn't win. As if fate demanded it, she stood, her movements stiff. This is a monstrous proposal. It is a practical one, he countered. She walked to the window, staring out at the city that was so close to crushing her. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremble in her hands. With every heartbeat, the silence in the room stretched, pulling tighter and tighter. He had to fight the urge to go to her, to put a hand on her back, to... What? Comfort her? The thought was so alien, so dangerous, he immediately crushed it. Finally, she turned back to him, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fire that stunned him. You'll have my answer in 24 hours, she said. And without another word, She walked out of his office, leaving behind a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with the ghost of her defiant scent.
The contract sat on the grand mahogany desk in the office, a venomous black and white snake coiled in the heart of her home. It had been delivered an hour after she'd fled Damon Blackwood's glass tower, and she hadn't been able to touch it since. Every line of cold, legal text felt like a bar on a cage she was being asked to build around herself. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the memory of his eyes, those burning amber eyes that saw too much, that promised nothing but a gilded prison. Mate. The word was a mockery, a sacred, primal thing in his world, twisted into a corporate strategy. How could she do it? How could she sell not just her body, but her very soul, for the sake of a name on a building? She walked through the silent halls of the estate, her hand trailing along the cool, flocked wallpaper. Her heels clicked a lonely rhythm on the marble floors. This house, this legacy, it was in her blood, in her bones. To save its past, to secure its future, to sacrifice her own present. Wasn't that the very definition of duty? Her grandfather would have done anything to protect the Vance name, which meant this wasn't really a choice at all. It was an execution of a sentence that had been handed down the moment the company's finances had gone into the red. She had to do it, because the alternative, letting her family name turn to ash, was unthinkable. She returned to the office and finally picked up the contract. Her fingers brushed over the thick, expensive paper. She forced herself to read the clauses, her eyes snagging on a small, almost hidden line of text near the end. All terms herein are subject to the primacy of pack law and the authority of the presiding alpha. What did that even mean? It felt like a trapdoor, a hidden depth to this deal she couldn't possibly comprehend. A chill traced its way down her spine. This was deeper and more dangerous than a simple business merger. She was stepping into a world with its own laws, its own predators, and its own unforgiving rules. She thought of Damon's raw power, the feeling of being in a room with a creature that was only pretending to be a man. And she was agreeing to chain herself to him. In the stillness that followed, she closed her eyes, and a single hot tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It was a tear for the girl who had dreamed of love, of partnership, of a life she could call her own. She mourned that girl, then she took a deep breath and let her go. The heiress of Vance Maritime had a duty to perform. She picked up her phone, her fingers surprisingly steady as she dialed the number Elias had given her. It rang once. Blackwood. His voice was there, immediate and commanding, as if he'd been waiting. Her own voice was a cool, steady whisper she didn't recognize. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I accept your terms."
"Mr. Blackwood, I accept your terms." The words came through the phone, cool and clear, devoid of the emotion he knew must be tearing her apart. He felt a sharp, unwelcome spike of admiration for her control. She had a spine of pure steel. "I expected nothing less, Ms. Vance," he replied, his own voice a mask of calm indifference. "A car will be waiting for you in the morning to finalize the paperwork and bring you to the penthouse." "I understand. Welcome to the family." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He hung up before she could reply. He stood in the darkness of his penthouse, the city a carpet of glittering jewels at his feet. He had won. The strategy was successful. His empire was secure. His rivals would be forced to retreat. He had gotten everything he wanted. So why did he feel like he just lost something essential? He walked to the bar and poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid a pale imitation of the fire in her eyes. He thought he was prepared for this. He had built his entire life on the principle of emotional detachment. After his first and only love had betrayed him, selling his secrets to his enemies for a pittance proving that love was just a weapon, he had sworn never to be that vulnerable again. He'd built walls of wealth and power so high no one could ever reach him, and he had just invited a woman to live inside them. Truth be told, his wolf was raging. It wasn't celebrating a strategic victory. It was roaring in triumph, a primal, possessive beast that believed it had just found its mate. It didn't understand that this was a contract, a lie. It only understood her scent, the fire in her spirit, the way she had stood before him unbowed. He took a long drink of the whiskey, the burn doing nothing to quiet the animal inside him. He told himself it didn't matter. He could control his own instincts. He had always been able to. But as the silence of his penthouse stretched around him, a cold knot of something that felt dangerously like fear tightened in his gut. He had just acquired his greatest asset, and in doing so, he might have just unleashed his most dangerous liability.
The boardroom was a glass box of silent judgment. It was long and narrow, with a table so polished she could see her own pale, anxious face staring back at her. On one side sat two lawyers, their faces blank, their dark suits identical. They looked less like men and more like well-dressed vultures, waiting for the feast to begin. And on the other side, at the head of the table, sat Damon Blackwood. He was perfectly still, a king carved from shadow and stone, his amber eyes missing nothing. Her breath caught. The air was cold and sterile, smelling of nothing at all, and it felt like it was being sucked right out of her lungs. Elias, Damon's quiet shadow, placed a stack of papers in front of her. The contract, her life, reduced to 100 pages of clauses and subsections. "If you would sign on the indicated pages, Ms. Vance," one of the lawyers said, his voice as dry as old paper. She picked up the heavy, expensive pen. It felt slick and foreign in her trembling fingers. Her signature. It looked wrong, like a forgery. With each stroke, she felt a piece of herself flaking away, turning to dust. The lawyers murmured legal phrases back and forth, their words a meaningless drone. In the span of a breath, it was over. A laptop was turned towards her. On the screen, she saw the accounts for Vance Maritime. Red numbers, so much red, followed by a transaction confirmation. Green numbers appeared. So many zeros she couldn't count them. Her family was saved. The legacy was secure. So, why did she feel like she was standing at her own funeral? She looked up and met Damon's gaze from across the vast, empty space of the table. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, nothing. Just a cold, possessive stillness that sent a shiver down her spine. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod to Elias. In the quiet that followed, the deal was done. The vultures gathered their papers, their purpose served. She was no longer Naira Vance, the failing heiress. She was now an asset, a property of Blackwood Industries. And just like that, her old life was over.
He watched her sign. Her hand trembled just for a second, but her signature was firm, a defiant slash of ink on the page. He felt the shift in the room, the subtle, ancient click of something locking into place. It was the same feeling he got when he closed a multi-billion-dollar deal, a cool wave of satisfaction and absolute control. But then, something else followed. A hot, primal surge from the wolf inside him. It wasn't satisfaction. It was possession. The beast didn't see a contract or a corporate maneuver. It saw a claiming. It saw his mark, invisible but there all the same, settling over her. His. The single word echoed in the back of his mind with the force of a command. He had to consciously stop his jaw from clenching. He kept his expression a perfect mask of indifference because showing any hint of that primal instinct would be a fatal mistake. It would give her power. It would create an expectation of something more than this cold transaction. His past had taught him that lesson in blood and betrayal. The lawyers finished their droning. The funds were transferred. The asset was secured. He saw the look on her face when she looked up at him, hollowed out, lost. A part of him, a part he had thought long dead, felt a flicker of something. Regret? He crushed it instantly. Regret was a weakness. He had done what was necessary for them both. He had saved her from ruin, and she in turn would save him from his rivals. It was a fair trade. Still, he couldn't deny the truth. Having her here, so close, was like holding a lit match over a trail of gasoline. He was playing a dangerous game, not just with his enemies but with himself. He gave the nod to Elias. Time to move to the next phase. Without another word, he stood, the soft rustle of his suit the only sound breaking the silence. He walked around the table, stopping not beside her but behind her chair. He was close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin, to catch that scent of rain and lavender that was already starting to drive him crazy. She stiffened, sensing him there. "You'll move into the penthouse tonight," he said, his voice a low command, devoid of any warmth. "A car is waiting." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked out of the boardroom, the doors closing with a quiet final click behind him, leaving her alone with the ghost of her former life.
The ride back to the Vance estate was a blur of rain-streaked windows and numb silence. The grand old house greeted her not as a home, but as a museum of a life she no longer lived. She had 1 hour to pack, 1 bag. That's what Elias had told her. Her thoughts spun. How do you pack for a new life when that life is a lie? She walked through the familiar rooms, her hand trailing over a velvet chair, a silver picture frame, the worn spine of a book. Each object was a memory. Each memory was a tiny, sharp pain. Her chest ached with a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness. This wasn't just a house. It was the only home she had ever known. In her bedroom, she opened her closet. The clothes felt like costumes for a person she used to be. She pulled out a few simple things: sweaters, jeans, a single black dress. Practical, anonymous, the uniform for her new role. She packed a suitcase, but it felt like she was packing a coffin for the girl she used to be. Her hand hesitated over a silver-framed photograph on her bedside table. It was her and her grandfather, standing on the docks, the wind whipping their hair. He was laughing, and she was a young girl with a future as wide and open as the sea. Maybe it was fate that she couldn't take it with her. She had to, because it belonged to a life that was no longer hers. To take it would be to bring a ghost into her gilded cage, a reminder of a freedom she had just sold. She left it there. Moments later, she was walking down the grand staircase, pulling the single suitcase behind her. The sound echoed in the empty hall. At the bottom, the front door was open and Elias was waiting, a patient, silent sentinel. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, the sound as final as a prison gate. The rain had started to fall harder, washing over the world in sheets of gray. As the black car pulled away from the curb, she watched her home, her history, her entire world shrink in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed by the rain and disappeared forever.
While Naira was saying goodbye to her past, Damon was fortifying his present. He stood in the east wing of his penthouse, a vast, empty space of white walls, gray furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows. It was as beautiful and as soulless as a magazine cover. This would be her space. His housekeeper, a stern, efficient woman named Mrs. Gable, stood beside him. "She will want for nothing," Damon said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "Her closets are to be stocked. The kitchen is to be filled with whatever she requests. She is to have complete access to this wing." "Of course, Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Gable said, her hands clasped. "But," Damon continued, turning to face her, his eyes hard, "she is not to enter my wing of the penthouse. My office is off limits. My routine is not to be disturbed. Her presence is a business necessity. Ensure the staff understands the boundaries." "Perfectly, sir." He knew he sounded cold, even cruel. But what choice did he have? He had to build walls within his own home because the alternative was letting her in, letting her see the man behind the CEO, letting her near the wolf, and that was a risk he could not afford to take. His control, his solitude, that was his armor. It had kept him safe for a decade. After that, he went to his own office and activated the security protocols. He watched on a screen as new permissions were set. Naira Vance was now registered as a resident. Her biometrics would grant her access to certain areas, while locking her out of others. He was drawing lines, building digital fences to reinforce the physical ones. It was a meticulous, calculated process. Yet, no matter how many firewalls he put up, he couldn't shake a simple, damning fact. Her scent. Even though she wasn't here yet, he could almost smell it. That faint trace of rain and lavender that had clung to his boardroom. He knew that soon it would be a permanent presence in his home, in his fortress, an invasion he had invited, a disruption he had paid for. He looked at the screen, at the words, Resident, Naira Vance, glowing in cool blue text. He had just given the key to his fortress to the one person who had the power to burn it all down.
The elevator doors opened with a soft, expensive sigh, and she stepped out, directly into his world. The penthouse was breathtaking and terrifying. It was a vast, open space of glass and shadow, so high up that the city below looked like a scattering of fallen stars. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the frantic, panicked beating of her heart. The air thickened around her, heavy with power, and a scent that was uniquely his. Something clean and sharp like winter air, with an undercurrent of something wilder like musk and dark earth. He was there, standing by the massive windows, looking out. He turned as she entered, and his presence seemed to fill the entire vast space, making it feel small and suffocating. Time stood still. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the polished floor. "Welcome home," he said, but the words were hollow, holding no warmth. He walked towards her, and she had to fight the instinct to take a step back. He didn't stop until he was only a few feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. He held out a slim, black tablet. "Your new life," he said. She took it. The screen lit up, showing a calendar filled with events. Galas, dinners, press conferences. There was a section labeled Background, filled with a detailed, completely fabricated history of their whirlwind romance. Where they met, their first date, inside jokes he had apparently told her. It was the script to the play of her life. "You will learn it," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Every detail. When a reporter asks you a question, you will have the answer." "And what about when we're not on camera?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. In the echo of his voice, his expression hardened, becoming even colder, if that was possible. He took another step closer, and the space between them burned with a sudden, intense heat. "When we are not on camera," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "we are nothing to each other. You will have this wing of the penthouse. I will have mine. We will not interact unless scheduled. In public, adoration. In private, nothing. Do you understand me?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak.
She was here. The moment she stepped out of the elevator, everything shifted. The air in his home, the sterile, controlled environment he had cultivated for years, was suddenly charged, alive. It was now filled with her scent, her defiant energy, her silent, wounded pride. It was 1,000 times worse than he had imagined. The wolf inside him wasn't just stirring, it was pacing, a restless, savage beast that wanted to close the distance between them and drag her into its den. He forced himself to walk towards her, to hand her the tablet, to lay down the law. Every word was a shield. Every cold command was a brick in the wall he was frantically trying to rebuild between them. He had to do it, because he could feel his own control fraying at the edges just from being near her. He saw her eyes widen as she read the fabricated history. He saw the flicker of pain as he laid out the terms of their private life. Good. She needed to understand. She needed to be afraid of any emotional connection, just as he was. It was the only way they would survive this arrangement. "Do you understand me?" he repeated, his voice harsher than he intended. She nodded, her wide blue eyes fixed on his. She looked so fragile in this huge, empty space. A beautiful, defiant creature caught in a cage of his own making. The urge to reach out, to smooth a stray strand of hair from her cheek, was so strong it was a physical ache in his chest. He hated it. He hated this weakness. He hated her for making him feel it. Before he could do something he would regret, he turned his back on her, walking towards the windows to put distance between them, to put his walls back up. "Unpack," he said, his voice clipped. "Rest. Your performance begins tomorrow." He stared out at the city lights, but he didn't see them. He only saw her reflection in the glass, a small, lonely figure in his vast, empty kingdom. He had brought her here to be a shield, a strategic asset to protect his empire. But as he stood there, feeling the unsettling pull she had on him, a terrifying thought struck him. What if he hadn't brought a shield into his home, but a Trojan horse aimed directly at his own heart?
Come morning, she woke up in a room that felt like a beautiful, empty cage. The sun streamed through windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, showing a sky so vast and blue it mocked her confinement. Her wing of the penthouse was luxurious, silent, and completely devoid of life. It had everything a person could want, and nothing a soul could ever need. Her thoughts spun. This was her new reality, a life of scheduled appearances and hollow comfort. She found Damon in a dining room so large it could have hosted a state dinner. He was already seated at one end of a long black table, a tablet propped up in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered. "Good morning," she said, the words feeling stiff and strange in her own mouth. "Sit," he said, his eyes still on the screen. "We have work to do." She sat at the opposite end of the table, the distance between them a vast, polished canyon. A silent housekeeper placed a plate of fruit and a cup of coffee in front of her. "Tonight is the Children's Hospital Gala," he began, finally looking up. His amber eyes were all business. "It's our public debut as a mated pair. There can be no mistakes, so let's review." He stared at her, an expectant look on his face. "Where was our first dinner?" She blinked. It was a test. "An Italian restaurant in the Old Quarter," she answered, her voice flat, reciting a line from the tablet's script. "You ordered the wrong wine on purpose to see if I would notice. And," he prodded, "your delivery is lacking. You need to sound as if you remember it fondly. Try again." A flash of heat, sharp and angry, went through her. "You can't program a memory, Mr. Blackwood." "I can," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "And I will. The world needs to believe our story. That's why your performance is critical. Again. Where did we have our first dinner?" Her jaw tightened. She took a breath and tried again, forcing a soft, reminiscent smile to her lips. "It was that lovely little Italian place. I remember you ordered a cheap Chianti, and I was so embarrassed for you until I realized you were just teasing me." He watched her, his expression unreadable. "Better. Now what did I give you for your last birthday?" "A first edition copy of—" She trailed off, a genuine, startled laugh escaping her lips before she could stop it. "You're serious? You actually put that in the script?" The moment the laugh left her lips, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was the first real, unguarded sound she had made since setting foot in this place, and it seemed to hang in the silent, sterile air.
The sound of her laugh hit him like a physical blow. It was bright and warm and utterly out of place in the calculated silence of his life. It was a sound full of a light he had forgotten existed. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The cold, controlled boardroom where he was drilling his new asset vanished, and for a split second, he was just a man, sitting across from a beautiful woman with a laugh that could shatter glass. His wolf, the beast he kept so tightly leashed, surged forward, not with aggression, but with a deep, rumbling purr of pure pleasure. It liked that sound. It wanted to hear it again. He blinked, forcing the moment away, rebuilding his walls brick by painful brick. "What's so amusing?" he asked, and he was disgusted to hear that his voice was a fraction rougher than before. She was still smiling, a real smile this time, and it transformed her face, chasing the shadows from her eyes. "A first edition copy of Wuthering Heights? It's a story about obsessive, destructive love. It's hardly romantic." He had put that detail in himself, a small, private irony. It was the book his mother used to read. He hadn't thought about it in years. "It is a story about a passion that transcends even death," he corrected, the words coming out before he could stop them. "It is about a bond that cannot be broken." As the silence stretched, they just looked at each other. He had revealed something, a tiny, unintentional crack in his armor. He could see the curiosity in her eyes, the sudden shift in how she was looking at him. She wasn't looking at a CEO anymore. She was looking at a man, and that was far more dangerous. He cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet room. He immediately shut down the conversation, reverting to the cold commander. "The point is, you must know the details," he said, his voice once again a blade of ice. "My primary rival, Marcus Thorne, will be at the gala tonight. He is a predator who looks for any sign of weakness. You will show him none. You will smile, you will hold my hand, and you will look at me as if I am the only man in the world." He stood up, the rehearsal over. "Be ready at 7, he commanded, turning his back on her before she could see the conflict he knew must be raging in his own eyes.
Stepping out of the car felt like stepping onto a stage. A tidal wave of flashing lights and shouted questions crashed over them. Her breath caught. It was overwhelming, a dizzying assault on the senses. But then, Damon's hand was on the small of her back, a firm, warm pressure that was both a brand of ownership and an anchor in the storm. "Smile," he murmured in her ear, his voice a low, private command in the public chaos. "You are mine. Show them." She did. She lifted her chin, summoned the smile she had practiced, and let him guide her through the sea of reporters. She was an actress, and this was her opening night. The gala was a blur of champagne, glittering jewels, and fake laughter. She played her part, clinging to Damon's arm, laughing at the right moments, her eyes finding his as if pulled by a string. It was surprisingly easy to pretend, because in this world of glittering surfaces, everyone was pretending. They were holding court near the grand staircase when a man approached. He was handsome in a slick, predatory way, with eyes that were cold and empty. She knew instantly who he was. "Blackwood," the man said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look domesticated." "Thorne," Damon replied, his voice dangerously pleasant. He pulled Naira a fraction of an inch closer, his arm a band of steel around her waist. "Allow me to introduce my mate, Naira." Marcus Thorne's eyes slid over her, a slow, insulting appraisal that made her skin crawl. "A true gem," he said, though his eyes told her he thought she was just another acquisition. "A Vance, I hear. Old blood. An impressive merger." "The very best, Thorne," Damon said, his tone dropping. "You should know I settle for nothing less." In that moment, the air between the two men crackled with a primal energy that had nothing to do with business. It was raw, territorial, and terrifying. She felt the muscles in Damon's arm tense, and a low, almost inaudible vibration rumbled through his chest. It was a growl, a real one. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't part of the show. She instinctively pressed closer to Damon's side, a silent plea for protection that was completely genuine. Thorne saw it. A smirk touched his lips. "Enjoy your evening," he said, before melting back into the crowd. The tension broke, but Damon's grip on her waist didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened. "Stay closer," he whispered, his voice a raw, possessive command that was for her alone. And as she looked up into his burning amber eyes, she realized with a jolt that the cold, calculating CEO was gone. In his place was a possessive, dangerous alpha. And he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting.
The moment Thorne's eyes landed on her, the beast broke its chains. It rose up inside him, a hot, possessive inferno that burned away all logic, all strategy, all control. His boardroom calculations vanished. His carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. All that was left was a single, primal, undeniable command. that roared through his soul. Mine. He felt her press against him, felt her silent, instinctive plea for safety. And the wolf inside him went mad with the need to answer it, to tear apart the threat that had caused her fear. He had to do it. He had to protect her. It was an instinct more powerful than breathing. He masked the snarl that rose in his throat with a cold, civilized smile. He traded verbal barbs with Thorn, each word a veiled threat, but his entire being was focused on the woman in his arms, the feel of her, the scent of her, the way she trusted him in that moment to be her shield. It was a heady, intoxicating poison. When Thorn finally walked away, the rage didn't recede. It simmered, a low, dangerous fire. Because of that, he couldn't let her go. He held her tighter, needing the physical proof that she was safe, that she was still there, that she was still his. "Stay closer," he growled, the words ripped from him by an impulse he couldn't control. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the flicker of fear mixed with a startling curiosity. She had seen the wolf, just for a second, and she hadn't run. Truth be told, that terrified him more than anything Thorn could ever do. For the rest of the night, he was a different man. He didn't let her stray more than a foot from his side. His hand was a constant, possessive weight on her back. He watched every man who dared to look at her for a second too long. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was real. The fake, transactional mating had suddenly been consumed by a raw, primal possession he had no idea how to fight. He didn't know what scared him more, the fact that he had lost control, or the terrifying, undeniable truth that he hadn't wanted it back.
The elevator doors slid shut with a soft whoosh, encasing them in a box of tense, suffocating silence. The gala, with its noise and its lights and its crowds, felt a world away. Here, there was only the two of them. The performance was over, but the tension was not. It was a living thing in the small space, thicker and more potent than it had ever been. She could still feel the phantom heat of his hand on her back. She could still hear the raw, possessive edge in his voice. Her world tilted on its axis tonight. The lines they had drawn between them, the cold, hard rules of their arrangement, had been washed away in a flood of primal emotion she didn't understand. When they stepped into the vast, dark penthouse, she couldn't stand the silence any longer. She turned to face him. "What was that tonight?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. He was loosening his tie, his movements stiff. He didn't look at her. "We did what was required. We presented a united front." "No," she said, taking a step closer. "That wasn't just a united front. That was something else. With Thorn. You were overplaying your part, Damon." She used his first name for the first time, and it felt both strange and powerful on her tongue. At the sound of his name, he finally stopped and looked at her. His eyes were dark, stormy, the amber burning with a banked fire. "It was a strategic display of ownership," he said, his voice clipped and cold, a desperate attempt to put the walls back up between them. "Thorn understands such things. He needed to see that you are not a weakness to be exploited." "It felt like more than that," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Then you were mistaken," he bit out, turning his back on her. "Do not confuse a calculated action for genuine emotion. It's a mistake you can't afford to make in this arrangement. Good night, Naira." He started to walk towards his wing of the penthouse, a king retreating to his fortress, leaving her standing alone in the shadows. The cold distance was back, more jarring than ever after the intensity of the evening. But then a low buzz vibrated from the living room table. It was his tablet. The screen lit up with an alert. She wasn't trying to spy, but she saw it clearly from across the room. It was a security photo of a burning warehouse, one of the Vance Maritime properties, she realized with a jolt of horror. And beneath it was a single typed word: Tuche.
He had to get away from her. With every step he took away from her, he could feel his control snapping back into place piece by painful piece. The lies came easily. Strategy, calculation, ownership. He used the words like shields, protecting himself from the terrifying truth of what had happened tonight. He had lost control. The wolf had tasted possession, and it was hungry for more. Her using his name, it had sent a jolt through him, a spark of connection he wasn't prepared for. He had to shut it down. He had to push her away to rebuild the distance that kept him safe. That's why his words were so harsh, so final. He was trying to convince himself as much as her. He was almost to the safety of his wing when he heard the buzz of the tablet. He turned, and he saw her, frozen, staring at the screen. He saw the horror dawn on her face as she recognized the warehouse. His blood ran cold. Without thinking, he was across the room in 3 long strides, grabbing the tablet. But it was too late. She had seen it. The burning building. The taunting message from Thorn. The war wasn't just veiled threats at a party anymore. Thorn had just brought it home. He had just attacked something that belonged to her. He looked from the screen to her face. She was pale, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning fear. All the anger, all the defiance was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that struck him to the core. And in that moment, the lines blurred completely. This was no longer about his empire. This wasn't about strategy. Thorn had made a fatal error. He had just made it personal. Cold rage. It was a feeling he recognized, an old, familiar weapon he had wielded in boardrooms and back alleys to build his empire. But this was different. This was not the cold, calculated anger of a CEO whose asset was attacked. This was the hot, volcanic fury of an alpha whose territory had been violated, and whose mate had been threatened. He stared at the image on the tablet, the burning warehouse, the single taunting word, and the beast inside him snarled, clawing for release. What was that? Naira's voice cut through his silent rage, sharp and steady despite the shock he saw on her pale face. What was that message? His first instinct was to protect, to shield, to lie. "It's business," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Thorn is sending a message." "That was a Vance Maritime property," she shot back, stepping closer, her fear burning away into a defiant fire that never failed to stun him. "My family's property. Were people hurt?" "The facility was empty for the night. No casualties," he said, already turning away, moving towards his office. He needed to make calls, deploy his security, and plan his retaliation. He needed to handle this. Alone. But then, she was in front of him, blocking his path. "Don't you dare shut me out," she said, her voice trembling with a fury that matched his own. "I am not some doll you can lock away in a pretty room while you fight your wars. That was my legacy you used as a bargaining chip, and it is my legacy he is now turning to ash. I have a right to know what you are going to do." He stared down at her, at the fierce, beautiful anger in her eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to lock her in the safest room in this penthouse and not let her out until Thorn's head was on a platter. He had to protect her, because the thought of her being in the line of fire was a physical pain, a tearing in his chest. "You will stay here," he said, his voice flat and final. "Where you are safe. That is all you need to know." "Safe?" she scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh. "I haven't been safe since the moment I met you. Your world, your rules, remember? Well, your war has just spilled over onto me. So don't you dare talk to me about being safe. Talk to me about fighting back." Between them, something cracked. He saw her then, not as a fragile asset to be protected, but as a queen demanding her place on the battlefield. The wolf inside him, the beast he was trying so hard to control, roared its approval. It did not want a doll. It wanted a fighter. It wanted her. A decision, hard and immediate, solidified in his mind. Hiding was what Thorn expected. Hiding was weakness. "Fine," he said, the word like a stone dropping into a silent pool. "You want to know what we're going to do? We are not going to hide. We are not going to cower." He met her defiant gaze, his own eyes burning with a cold, lethal promise. "The Ethel Hotel launch is tomorrow night. It's the biggest social event of the season. We will be there. We will smile for the cameras and we will show him that he cannot touch us. We will show him that we are unbreakable.
His words hung in the air, a crazy, reckless challenge. Go out? In public? After someone had just firebombed her family's warehouse? It was insane. And yet, a thrill of something wild and defiant shot through her. Hiding in this beautiful prison felt like a surrender, but this was a fight. Okay, she heard herself say, her voice steady. What do I wear? The moment the words left her lips, a slow, dangerous smile touched Damon's mouth for the first time. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to hunt. Something that shows them you are a queen, Naira, not a pawn. The night of the hotel launch, the air was electric with tension. She stood beside Damon, her hand on his arm, a confident smile plastered on her face. She wore a dress the color of blood, a slash of defiant crimson in a sea of black tuxedos. She felt it, etched in fire. The way Damon's eyes followed her every move, a possessive, burning gaze that was for her alone. They were a perfect picture of a power couple, laughing and mingling, but beneath the surface it was a lie. Her nerves were screaming. Every stranger who got too close, every sudden noise made her jump. Damon's hand was a constant grounding pressure on her back, his body a shield. He's not here, she murmured, scanning the crowd. He doesn't have to be. Damon's voice was a low rumble in her ear. His people are. Just keep smiling. They left just after midnight, slipping out a side entrance to avoid the press. The air outside was cool and quiet, a welcome relief from the noise of the party. The black car was waiting for them in the service alley. It all happened in a single heartbeat. They were halfway to the car when another vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, screeched out of the darkness, blocking their path. The driver's door of their own car was thrown open, and their driver was dragged out. Before she could even scream, men were swarming them. 4 of them. They moved with a strange, fluid grace that was not quite human. Damon's reaction was instantaneous. He shoved her behind him, his body a solid wall, and a sound ripped from his throat that was not a word. It was a snarl. A deep, guttural, animalistic sound of pure, killing rage that made the air itself seem to vibrate. And then the world exploded into brutal, violent chaos. Terror stole her breath. It was too fast, a blur of motion and violence. One moment Damon was a man in a tuxedo, the next he was a whirlwind of savage fury. He didn't fight like a man. He moved with a speed that shouldn't be possible, his blows landing with sickening, bone-crunching force. Her world tilted. These weren't just thugs. They were like him, predators. One of them broke past Damon's guard, lunging for her. She scrambled backward, her heel catching on the slick pavement, and she went down hard. Pain shot up her arm. The man loomed over her, his eyes glowing with a faint predatory light, a cruel grin on his face. Something inside her shifted. The terror didn't vanish, but something else rose up to meet it. Pure, unadulterated rage. The heiress, the pawn, the actress, they all burned away in a flash of adrenaline. All that was left was a survivor. Her eyes darted around, searching for a weapon, anything. Her gaze landed on a length of rusty metal pipe lying near a dumpster. Without thinking, she lunged for it. Her fingers closed around the cold, rough metal just as the man reached for her. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, but she swung the pipe with all her strength, a wild, desperate arc of motion. It connected with his knee. There was a sickening crunch, and the man screamed, a high, inhuman sound. His grip vanished. The tension broke. She scrambled away, her heart hammering, the pipe still clutched in her hand. She looked up just in time to see Damon finish the last attacker, moving with a final, brutal efficiency that was both terrifying and magnificent. Then, silence. A ringing, echoing silence in the dark alley, broken only by their own harsh, ragged breathing. They were both standing, surrounded by the crumpled forms of their attackers. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood. She looked at Damon. His hair was disheveled, his knuckles were bloody, and his perfect suit was torn. But it was his eyes that held her. They were blazing. The amber turned to molten gold, glowing with a primal light. He was looking at her, at the pipe in her hand, at the fierce, terrified defiance on her face. And the look in his eyes wasn't just relief. It was awe. It was reverence. It was the look of a wolf who had just seen its mate make her first kill. The business deal was gone. The contract was a joke. Whatever this was, it had been forged anew in the fire and blood of this alley.
The world went red. The instant the SUV blocked their path, the man, the CEO, the carefully constructed persona, ceased to exist. There was only the alpha, the protector, the beast. A growl rose in his throat, a promise of death to anyone who dared to touch her. He shoved her behind him, the instinct to shield her more powerful than any conscious thought. And then he met them. He let the wolf rise just beneath his skin, let its strength flood his limbs, its speed sharpen his senses. He was a blur of contained violence, a predator in his element. He felt ribs crack under his fists, felt the satisfying grunt of his enemies as they fell. But his focus was split. Half of his mind was on the fight. The other half was a screaming, frantic litany of Nira. Nira, she has to be safe. Keep her safe. Then he saw it. One of them broke through, lunging for her. For a split second that stretched into an eternity, his heart stopped. He couldn't get there in time. Rage and terror warred within him, and then he saw her move. He saw her grab the pipe. He saw her swing. He heard the crack of bone and the inhuman shriek of pain from Thorne's man. In that moment, everything changed. The world narrowed to a single point of brilliant, blinding clarity. Her, fighting, fierce, a warrior. Not a liability to be protected, but a partner to fight alongside. A wave of pride so fierce, so possessive, so absolute, crashed over him, wiping away the last 10 years of his cold, empty life. The final wall around his heart didn't just crack, it was obliterated. He finished the last man with a cold, brutal fury, his movements precise and deadly. In the stillness that followed, he turned to her. She was on her feet, breathing hard, the pipe still held in a white-knuckled grip. Her eyes were wide with shock and fear, but they were blazing with the heart of a fighter. She was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. He took a step towards her, and then another. The business arrangement was a distant, laughable memory. The contract was ash. He had brought her into his world to be a shield for his empire. He realized now he had been wrong. He had brought her here to be the shield for his soul.
The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, thrumming eternity. The sound of their own breathing seemed deafening in the confines of the new car Elias had brought them. She was hyper-aware of everything, the slick feel of the leather seat, the distant siren wailing in the city, and the heat rolling off Damon in waves. He sat beside her, not touching, but his presence was an overwhelming physical thing. She kept seeing it in her mind, the flash of his eyes, the inhuman speed, the raw, brutal power. She should have been terrified of him. Deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't. She felt safer with him than she had ever felt in her entire life. The elevator doors opened into the silent penthouse. The adrenaline that had kept her on her feet began to fade, and a deep, shaking tremor started in her hands. The metal pipe she hadn't even realized she was still carrying clattered to the marble floor. Damon was instantly at her side, his hands on her arms, steadying her. "You're okay," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "You're safe now." He led her to one of the white sofas and gently pushed her down to sit. That's when he saw it. A long, shallow cut on her forearm from when she had fallen, beaded with blood. His expression hardened. His gaze was a physical touch, tracing the line of the cut. "Wait here," he ordered, and disappeared into his wing. He returned moments later with a first aid kit. He knelt in front of her, the powerful, untouchable alpha billionaire kneeling on the floor at her feet. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, it made her breath catch in her throat. Without a word, he took her arm, his touch shockingly gentle. His large, calloused fingers were deft as he cleaned the cut, his focus absolute. She watched his dark head bent over her arm, the way his brow was furrowed in concentration. In this quiet, simple act of care, she saw a side of him she never knew existed. There was no CEO here, no cold-blooded strategist. Just a man, tending to her, his touch a silent confession of a feeling he would never, ever speak aloud.
The sight of her blood, a thin crimson line against her pale skin, sent a fresh wave of murderous rage through him. It was a visceral, physical reaction. Thorne would pay for this. He would burn his entire world to the ground for this one small cut. He knelt before her, the first aid kit in his hands. He had to do this himself because the thought of anyone else touching her, of her being in any pain at all, was a fire in his veins. He took her arm. Her skin was so soft, so fragile, and yet he had seen her wield a pipe like a warrior. The contradiction of her was a constant source of wonder. He cleaned the wound with a single-minded focus, blocking out everything else. The world narrowed to this one small, intimate task. Her pulse fluttered against his thumb, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. He could smell the faint scent of her fear, but underneath it was the intoxicating scent of her strength. His wolf was quiet for the first time all night, not snarling or raging, but content, soothed by this simple act of care, of possession, of marking his territory by healing her. He finished, placing a bandage over the cut. His hand lingered on her arm for a heartbeat too long. He could feel the tremor running through her. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to wrap himself around her and never let her go, to absorb her fear and her pain into himself. The intensity of the feeling, so raw and unprotected, terrified him. It was too much, too fast. With a deep breath, he pulled away, breaking the spell. He stood up, putting the physical distance between them again, his walls slowly, clumsily, rising back into place. He looked down at her, her eyes wide and questioning in the dim light of the penthouse. He had to say something, to re-establish some kind of order, but the old rules no longer applied. "You are not to leave this penthouse," he said, and the words came out not as a cold command but as a raw, guttural plea. "Ever. Not without me." This was no longer a term of their contract. It was the absolute, undeniable law of his entire existence.
The days that followed the attack bled into one another, a strange, suspended reality of silent meals and shared glances. The penthouse, once a symbol of her confinement, had now become a fortress, a sanctuary, and she was no longer a prisoner, but a willing resident, trapped not by a contract but by a shared, unspoken danger. Deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't want to leave. She watched him. She saw the mask he wore for the world and the predator he had unleashed in the alley. But now, in the quiet hours inside these glass walls, she started to see someone else. The man. He was a ghost in his own home, constantly on the phone, his voice a low, lethal hum as he commanded his unseen armies. He would go hours without speaking to her, lost in his war with Thorne. And yet, he was always aware of her. She would look up from a book and find his amber eyes on her, his focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. He would leave a cup of tea on the table beside her, exactly how she liked it, without a word. He'd find a blanket and drape it over her shoulders when she fell asleep on the sofa. These small, silent acts of care were more intimate than any conversation they'd ever had. They were cracks in his armor, glimpses of the man he kept so carefully chained. She didn't know what scared her more, the monster who fought for her in the alley, or the man who brought her tea. One afternoon, the silence became too much to bear. He was staring out the window, his shoulders tense with a heavy burden. She walked up behind him. "You can't win a war by hiding in your castle, Damon. she said softly. He turned, his expression unreadable. My goal is not to win a war. It is to keep you alive. And what kind of life is this? She countered, gesturing at their beautiful gilded cage. Waiting for the next attack? Waiting for him to burn another piece of my family's legacy to the ground? Hiding is losing. It's letting him control us. The moment the words left her lips, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He saw the truth in what she said. He just didn't want to admit it.
He was losing his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't focus. He was supposed to be dismantling Thorne's operations piece by painful piece, but his thoughts were a chaotic mess. His concentration was shattered by the sound of her turning a page, the scent of her hair as she walked past his office, the sight of her curled up on the sofa, looking so small and out of place in his vast, empty world. She was a constant, beautiful, maddening distraction. He had to keep her close because the thought of her being anywhere else, even in another so-called safe location, felt like leaving a part of his own soul unprotected. So he endured this strange domestic torment. He watched her, and he fought the constant savage urge to go to her, to touch her, to claim her. The wolf inside him was no longer raging. It was waiting. It paced the borders of his soul, content for now, simply because she was in its territory, in its den. Which meant this was the most dangerous situation he had ever been in. When she came up behind him, her voice soft but full of steel, it was a relief. The silence between them had become a heavy, charged thing, filled with unspoken feelings and simmering desire. Hiding is losing, she said. It's letting him control us. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that her only job was to stay safe, to stay behind the walls he had built to protect her. But he couldn't because she was right. His father, a ruthless alpha in his own right, had taught him one essential rule of warfare. You never, ever let your enemy dictate the terms of the engagement. And right now, Thorne was dictating everything. Her world tilted, and so did his. He was the alpha, the commander, the king. But looking at her now, at the fire in her eyes, he realized he wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for his queen. And a queen does not hide. What do you propose? He asked, his voice a low rumble. And as she laid out her idea, so bold and reckless and brilliant, he felt that old, familiar thrill of the hunt return. But this time it was different. This time he wasn't hunting alone.
We give them a show, she said, her voice gaining strength, her heart pounding with a wild, terrifying energy. We don't just attend an event, we make the event. Let's move up the marking ceremony. Damon stared at her, his amber eyes wide with shock. A public, official, binding ceremony, she pressed on, the idea taking shape even as she spoke it. We invite everyone, the business world, the press, the leaders of the other packs. We make a display of strength so absolute, a bond so real, that attacking us would be an act of open war against all of them. It would be suicide for him. It was a crazy gamble, putting herself on display like that, turning a sacred right into a power play. But it felt right. It felt like taking their power back. He was silent for a long time, just watching her, his mind clearly working at 1,000 miles an hour. She thought he was going to say no, that it was too reckless. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. You are more ruthless than I gave you credit for, Naira Vance. I've had a good teacher, she replied, a small smile of her own touching her lips. The announcement went out the next morning, an official proclamation sent to every major news outlet and every alpha pack on the continent. The alpha of Blackwood Industries would formally mark his mate, Naira of House Vance, in 1 week's time. It was a declaration of power, a challenge thrown down in the face of their enemies. Moments later, the consequences arrived. Elias entered Damon's office, his face grim, a tablet in his hand. Sir, he said, his voice tight. You need to see this. Damon took the tablet. Naira moved to his side, her eyes scanning the screen. It was a notorious gossip blog. the kind that trafficked in scandal and ruin. And there, in huge, bold letters, was the headline. Her blood ran cold. The article was filled with details, anonymous sources, leaked clauses from their original agreement. It painted a sordid, transactional picture, the desperate, ruined heiress selling herself to the cold, calculating billionaire for a bailout. It made their entire relationship look like a fraud, a lie. Her breath caught. It was the ultimate humiliation. Thorne hadn't just attacked their strategy. He had attacked her character, her sacrifice, her choice. He had twisted the truth and hung it out for the entire world to see.
Rage. Pure, black, killing rage. He stared at the screen, at the vicious words that stripped away Naira's dignity, that painted her as a desperate gold digger. He didn't give a damn about his own reputation. He'd weathered worse. But this attack on her honor, it was unforgivable. He could feel her beside him, trembling. He could feel her shame and her pain as if it were his own. And in that moment, something inside him, the last cold, calculating piece of the businessman he used to be, finally died. All that was left was the alpha. And the mate. "I'll kill him," he growled, the words a low, guttural promise. "I will tear him apart with my bare hands." He expected her to cry, to crumble. He was prepared to comfort her, to shield her from this. Instead, she looked up from the screen, and the look in her eyes stopped his breath. The pain was there, yes, but underneath it was a fire so hot and so fierce it could have forged steel. Her chin was lifted, her back was straight, and her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. "No," she said, "killing him is too easy. We have to ruin him. We have to make everyone believe this is real." As if the world narrowed to a single point, he could only see her, this incredible, unbreakable woman who had been dragged into his war, who had been attacked and humiliated, and whose first instinct was not to retreat, but to fight back harder. The love he had been fighting, the bond he had been denying, the truth he had been running from, crashed over him in a single unstoppable wave. He was lost, utterly and completely lost, and he had never felt more found in his entire life.
The words were out before she could stop them. Brave words from a heart that felt like it was shattering into a million pieces. She expected him to agree, to start planning, to become the cold general again. Instead, he just stared at her, his amber eyes blazing with an emotion so raw, so powerful it made her forget how to breathe. The air in the room became thick, heavy, charged with a voltage that made the hair on her arms stand up. The space between them burned. He took a step towards her, then another. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. She could feel the heat rolling off his body, see the frantic pulse beating in the strong column of his throat. "Naira," he whispered, and her name on his lips was a prayer and a plea and a surrender. And she let it happen. He lowered his head and he kissed her. It was nothing like she had ever imagined. It was not gentle, it was not tender. It was a storm, a desperate, consuming collision of rage and relief, of pain and passion, of every unspoken word and every denied feeling that had been simmering between them from the very beginning. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her in place as his mouth claimed hers. It was a kiss of pure, undiluted possession, a furious brand on her soul. It was a promise of protection and a declaration of war. It was the most honest thing that had ever happened between them. Her own hands came up, clutching at the front of his shirt, holding on as the world spun away. She kissed him back with all the fear and fight and a deep, aching want she hadn't even let herself admit she felt. It was a surrender and a victory all at once.
Her defiant words were the spark. His world was the gasoline. The moment she said it, "Make them believe it's real," the last of his control shattered. The last of his reasons, his logic, his carefully constructed lies, turned to ash. There was only one truth left in the entire universe, her. As if pulled by a string, he moved, closing the distance between them. He saw the surprise in her eyes, the way her lips parted on a silent gasp. He was going to kiss her, and it wasn't a strategy, it wasn't a plan, it was an absolute soul-deep necessity, as vital as the next beat of his heart. He kissed her, and it was like coming home after a lifetime at war. It was savage and desperate, and everything he had been starving for. The taste of her was a heady mix of strength and sorrow, and it was the most addictive thing he had ever known. He poured all of his rage at Thorn, all of his fear for her, all of his fierce, untamed love into that one single kiss. He was marking her, not with his teeth but with his mouth, with his soul, trying to burn the truth of what she was to him so deeply into her that no lie could ever touch it again. She kissed him back, and her response was not the timid surrender of a pawn. It was the fierce claiming of a queen. She met his fire with her own, her hands clutching him, pulling him closer. Between one breath and the next, the world outside the penthouse, Thorn, the contract, the watching world, ceased to exist. There was only this, her, them, the undeniable, unbreakable truth. He finally broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, their breathing harsh and ragged in the silent room. He kept his eyes closed, savoring the feeling of her, the reality of her. The contract was a lie, the performance was a lie, but this was real. And there was no going back. Ever.
In the quiet that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. His lips were still warm against hers, the taste of him a phantom on her tongue. He rested his forehead against hers, and for the first time, the vast, empty penthouse felt like a home. It felt like a sanctuary. She could feel the wild, frantic beat of his heart against her chest, a perfect match to her own. The contract, Thorn, the watching world. It all faded away into a distant, meaningless hum. There was only this, him, them. A fragile, terrifying hope bloomed in her chest, a delicate flower in the ruins of her old life. Maybe this could be real. But then the spell was shattered. A sharp, insistent buzz came from the intercom. Damon stiffened, pulling back slowly, the mask of the Alpha sliding back into place, though his eyes, when they met hers, still held the raw, unguarded emotion of their kiss. "What is it, Elias?" he said, his voice a low growl into the receiver. His man's voice was tinny and tight with urgency, but she could hear every word. "Sir, Thorn just made his move. It's not a physical attack. It's financial. He's initiated a hostile takeover bid against Vance Maritime." The fragile flower of hope in her chest withered and died. "He's using a dozen shell corporations," Elias continued, "exploiting a loophole in the original acquisition framework. He's trying to rip the company right out from under us." Her world tilted. The very thing she had sacrificed everything for, the company, her legacy, was being used as a weapon against them. Damon's phone buzzed, a text message. He looked at it, and she saw all the warmth drain from his face, replaced by a cold, familiar dread that looked like a ghost from his past. He held the phone out so she could see it. A message from a blocked number. From Thorn. "I told you, everything you touch, I will burn. Let's see how your mate feels when her sacrifice was for nothing." The words were a blade of ice, sliding straight into her heart. Thorn hadn't just attacked a company. He had attacked the very foundation of her sacrifice. He had attacked the meaning of her choice. And looking at Damon's face, at the haunted look in his eyes, she knew this blow had landed exactly where the enemy had intended.
The world went silent. The warmth of her lips, the scent of her surrender, the earth-shattering feeling of connection. It all vanished, replaced by the icy grip of his oldest fear. History was repeating itself. He stared at Thorn's message, but he wasn't seeing the words. He was seeing another woman's face, hearing another false promise, feeling the phantom sting of another knife in his back. A past betrayal, where his love and trust had been used as a weapon to nearly destroy him, rose from its grave and wrapped its cold hands around his throat. Thorn wasn't just attacking a company. He was using Nira, his connection to Nira, as the crowbar to pry his world apart, the exact same way it had happened before. The wolf inside him snarled, demanding he go out and hunt, that he tear Thorn limb from limb for this insult, for this attack on their mate. But the man was terrified. The old, cold, ruthless logic that had kept him safe for a decade screamed at him, a single damning truth. She is the target. Your feeling for her is the weapon. As long as she is tied to you, she will never be safe. He looked at her, at the horror and devastation on her beautiful face, and he knew what he had to do. It was the hardest, most brutal calculation of his life. To save her, he had to destroy her. To protect her, he had to break her heart. He had to cut her out of his life like a surgeon removing a cancer. As if the world narrowed to a single point, his decision was made. The raw, vulnerable man who had kissed her just moments ago retreated, and the cold, unfeeling alpha he had been for 10 years took his place. He turned from her and walked to his desk. "Elias," he said into the phone, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Get my legal team on the line. Now."
She watched as he transformed. The warmth, the passion, the raw connection of their kiss, it all evaporated, leaving behind a man made of ice and steel. He moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency, barking orders into the phone, his words sharp and precise. Void the mating contract, effective immediately, yes, all of it. Transfer the controlling shares of Vance Maritime to a new independent trust. Her name is the only one on it. Liquidate a portion of my personal assets and fund it with enough capital to fight off any takeover for the next century. I don't care what it costs. Just do it. Her thoughts spun. What was he doing? Voiding the contract? Giving her the company? It made no sense. "Damon, what are you doing?" she pleaded, walking towards him. "We can fight him. Together. You said we would show him we are unbreakable." He finished his call and turned to face her. The man who had looked at her with such raw love just a few minutes ago was gone. In his place was a stranger, his amber eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky. "The arrangement has become a liability," he said, his voice flat. "Thorn is using you to get to me. I am rectifying that tactical error." "A tactical error?" she whispered, her heart splintering. "Is that what I am to you? After everything?" "This was always business," he said, and every word was a deliberate, cruel blow. "The purpose of the deal was to protect your company and my empire. My empire is now at risk because of this connection. Therefore, the deal is concluded. You are a liability I can no longer afford." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and thick. "That's not true. I don't believe you. Look at me and tell me that kiss was a lie." For a single fleeting second, she saw a crack in his icy armor, a flicker of agony, of pure, wrenching pain in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that chilling emptiness. He took a step back, putting more distance between them. It was a moment of weakness, a miscalculation. "It was never real, Naira," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "You have your company. You have your legacy. You have more money than your family has seen in 3 generations. Our contract is fulfilled. You are free to go." He turned his back on her. "Elias will escort you home." The finality in his voice was absolute. He had saved her, and he had utterly, completely destroyed her.
Every word was a lie. Every cold, cruel syllable was a dagger he had to plunge into his own heart before turning it on her. He could feel her shattering behind him, could feel the waves of her disbelief and heartbreak washing over him. It was the sound of his own soul tearing in two. He had to do it. It was the only way. He had to be monstrous. He had to be cruel. He had to make her hate him, because if she hated him, she would leave. And if she left, she would be safe. Thorn would have no more leverage. Her company would be hers again, protected and untouchable. She would be free from him, from his wars, from his world. It was the only act of true love he had ever committed in his entire, miserable life. And it required him to become a monster. He saw the flicker of hope when she challenged him about the kiss. He saw her searching for the man who had held her just moments before, and he let it happen. He let her see the pain in his eyes for a split second, a silent, desperate apology he could never speak aloud. Then he crushed it, burying it under a decade of ice and control. He turned his back on her because if he had to look at her for one more second, he would have shattered. He would have fallen to his knees and begged her to stay, and in doing so, he would have signed her death warrant. He heard her sharp, indrawn breath. He heard the sound of her silent, broken sob. He heard Elias enter the room, his presence quiet and respectful. He heard her footsteps as she was led away. He heard the soft, final chime of the elevator. And then, silence. A silence more profound, more absolute, more deafening than any he had ever known. He had won. She was safe. So why did it feel like he had just been wiped from the face of the earth?
She was home. The Vance estate was the same as she had left it. Quiet, dignified, safe. Her lawyers had called, confirming everything. The company was hers, free and clear, backed by a trust so massive it was untouchable. She had done it. She had won. Her original goal, the one she had sacrificed everything for, was achieved. Her chest ached with a hollowness so vast it threatened to consume her. The victory was ashes in her mouth. She walked through the grand, lonely halls, a ghost in her own life. She had her legacy, but her heart was still in that cold glass penthouse, shattered on the floor. He had lied. It had all been a lie. The protective hand on her back, the awe in his eyes after the fight, the desperate, soul-stealing kiss. All of it. A performance. A miscalculation. That night, she curled up on the window seat in her old bedroom, staring out at the rain. She had been so stupid. She had confronted her flaw, the belief that she could keep her heart separate from the deal, and she had failed spectacularly. She had given him her heart, and he had handed it back to her in pieces, calling it a tactical error. She was about to close the curtains when she saw it lying on her desk, the tablet he had given her, a relic of her time as his possession. Her first instinct was to hurl it against the wall, but then her hand froze. Her fingers brushed over the cool screen. With a sense of morbid curiosity, she turned it on. She was going to wipe it clean, erase the last trace of him from her life. As she navigated through the files, a folder she hadn't seen before caught her eye. It was labeled Vance Prelim. Her finger trembled as she opened it. It wasn't just financial data. It was surveillance. Photos and video feeds of her, of the estate, of the docs, and the file dates. They were from weeks before he had ever summoned her to his office. It was a dossier not on her company, but on her. There were notes. Financial predators circling, neutralized. Security at the estate is weak. Upgrade protocols. Her breath caught. He hadn't just been vetting her as a corporate asset. He had been watching over her, protecting her, long before she ever knew his name. The last cruel words he had spoken, "It was never real," echoed in her mind. But this file, this data, this proof, it whispered a different, more dangerous truth.
He stood in the darkness of his penthouse, a king on a throne of ice ruling over a kingdom of one. The silence was a physical weight. There was no soft sound of pages turning from the other room, no faint scent of lavender in the air. Nothing. Just the cold, sterile hum of the building and the distant, indifferent lights of the city he owned. He had his empire. He had his solitude. He was in complete control, and he was utterly, completely alone. He had pushed her away to save her, and in doing so, he had carved out his own heart. The wolf inside him was no longer snarling. It was a low, continuous howl of pure, unadulterated agony, a silent scream of loss for its mate. It was a pain so profound, so constant. It was the new beat of his heart. He had proven his old, toxic belief right. To be strong, he must be alone. And the victory was indistinguishable from death.
The screen of the tablet glowed in the dark, a single point of light in her shattered world. Vance Prelim. The file name was so cold, so corporate, but the contents, they were anything but. As the truth unraveled, her breath hitched. Surveillance logs, financial shields, anonymous interventions that had stopped corporate predators from sinking their teeth into Vance Maritime months ago, long before she'd even known she was drowning. And the dates, they went back for weeks before he had ever called her. He hadn't been looking for a pawn. He had been a guardian angel, a silent, unseen protector, moving pieces on a board she didn't even know she was playing on. In that moment, everything he'd said to her, every cruel, cutting word replayed in her mind, but with a new devastating clarity. It was never real. A tactical error. A liability. Lies. All of it. Deep down, she knew the truth. He hadn't pushed her away out of cruelty. He had pushed her away out of fear, out of some twisted, heartbreaking, self-destructive sense of love. He saw her as a vulnerability Thorne could exploit, so he had cut her out of his life, believing it was the only way to save her. Her despair didn't vanish. It transformed. It crystallized into a hard, brilliant diamond of pure, furious resolve. He was a fool. A noble, magnificent, self-sacrificing fool who was going to get himself killed if she didn't do something. Her goal was no longer to mourn what she had lost. It was to fight for the man who refused to fight for himself. Without thinking, she snatched her phone from the bedside table. Her fingers flew, dialing the private number he had given her, the one she had memorized without even realizing it. It rang. Once. Twice. Please pick up, Damon. Please.
The penthouse was a tomb. He sat in the dark, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, the silence a roaring in his ears. The wolf inside him was a wounded, grieving thing, and its pain was his own. He had done the right thing. He had saved her. He repeated the words over and over, a hollow mantra that brought no comfort. But then, his solitude was broken. Elias appeared in the doorway, a shadow in the gloom. "Sir," his voice was tight. "An update. Thorne has officially withdrawn his takeover bid on Vance Maritime." Damon felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just empty. "So it's over?" "No, sir," Elias said quietly. "It's not. He's pulled back from the company. But then, he's doubled his surveillance on the Vance estate. All of his assets are retasking. He's not watching the company anymore, Damon." Elias paused, letting the weight of his next words land. He's watching her. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The empty victory turned to ash in his mouth. His entire agonizing sacrifice, his self-inflicted torment. It had all been for nothing. He hadn't removed the target from her back. He had just painted it brighter. He had sent her away from the most fortified building on the continent and left her isolated, vulnerable, an easier target. The old fear, the ghost of his past, was incinerated in a blast of pure, white-hot terror for her. He had been so blinded by his own trauma that he had made the worst tactical error of his life. As if summoned by the sheer force of his panic, his private phone, the one only a handful of people had the number for, began to ring. He looked at the screen. Her name was glowing there. Nyara. He snatched it up, his heart hammering against his ribs, his voice a raw, ragged thing. "Nyra."
He arrived less than an hour later. She met him not in the grand foyer, but in the old library, a room filled with the comforting scent of leather and aging paper. It was her territory. She needed him to know the balance of power had shifted. He walked in, looking like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were shadowed, his face pale and drawn. The arrogant, controlled alpha was gone, replaced by a man who looked utterly, completely lost. Her heart skipped. "You were a fool," she said, her voice soft but unforgiving. There was no time for tears or accusations. He stopped in the middle of the room, the space between them charged with 1,000 unspoken words. "I know. You pushed me away to protect me. she continued, taking a step towards him. It was a noble, useless gesture, Damon. He's still coming for me. The only thing you accomplished was ensuring you would have to face him alone. She saw it in his eyes, the raw, humbling agony of admitting she was right. I was wrong, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't hide. I let my past. It blinded me. I never should have let you go. I came to bring you back. No, she said, shaking her head. I'm not coming back to hide in your penthouse. Hiding is over. From now on, we fight. Together. He looked at her, a dawning awe on his face. How? The marking ceremony, she said, the plan that had formed in her moment of revelation now feeling like the only possible path forward. It's still on the public calendar. The world is expecting it. What if we gave it to them? As the silence stretched, she saw the strategist, the commander, click back into place behind his eyes. It would be a trap, he murmured, the wheels already turning. Exactly, she said. Thorn will have to come, to show up in person to witness his supposed victory, to see the fraudulent mate. He won't be able to resist the chance to gloat. And when he's here, on our territory, we expose him, Damon finished, a dangerous, predatory light returning to his eyes. In front of the entire pack hierarchy, in front of the world. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of reverence and disbelief. It's the riskiest move we could make. And it's the only one we have left, she countered. We have to do this because it's the only way to beat him on our terms in front of everyone.
He had come here to save her, to rescue her, to bring her back to his fortress where he could protect her properly this time. Instead, she was saving him. He listened to her lay out the plan, so audacious and brilliant it stole his breath. She wasn't just a fighter. She was a strategist, a queen. She had taken his greatest vulnerability, their public, questioned bond, and was honing it into a weapon. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't alone in his war room. He had a partner, an equal. The feeling of it, the sheer, unadulterated relief and strength that came from it, was overwhelming. Okay, he said, the single word a vow, a treaty, a complete surrender to their shared fate. We do it your way. From there, everything moved with breathtaking speed. They spent the next hour in the library, their heads bent close together over a table, a king and queen planning the battle that would decide their future. He made calls, deploying his security, his legal teams, his network of spies. She made calls of her own, to old family friends, powerful figures who respected the Vance name, securing allies he never could have reached. They moved in perfect sync, a seamless unit. By the time the sun began to set, the trap was laid. Formal, final invitations were sent out. One, on thick, creamy cardstock bearing the combined crest of Blackwood and Vance, was dispatched by a special courier. It was addressed to Mr. Marcus Thorne. Inside, below the elegant script detailing the time and place of the ceremony, Naira had insisted he add a single, handwritten line. Your presence is awaited. It was no longer an invitation, it was a challenge, and they both knew it was one Thorne would be unable to resist.
The night of the ceremony, the Vance estate was transformed. Hundreds of soft lights glowed among the ancient oak trees, and the air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and anticipation. The most powerful people in their world, both human and shifter, moved through the gardens, their low conversations a dangerous humming undercurrent. It was beautiful. And it was a battlefield. But for the first time, she felt no fear. She stood beside Damon near the French doors that led out to the ceremonial platform, her hand resting securely in his. She wore a simple, elegant gown of midnight blue, the color of the sky just before the stars appeared. It wasn't a costume. It was her armor. Are you ready? Damon murmured, his voice a low, steady rumble beside her ear. I am, she said, and she meant it. She was no longer a pawn in his game. She was the one who had designed the board. Then she saw him. Marcus Thorne was gliding through the crowd, a shark in a tailored suit, a confident, predatory smirk on his face. He caught her eye from across the lawn and gave a small, mocking nod. He thought he had already won. He was here to watch the final, pathetic act of their little play. She felt Damon's hand tighten around hers, his knuckles hard against her own. She squeezed back, a silent message. "We are ready." He had come here to witness a fraud, to see a hollow performance. He had no idea he had just walked into his own execution. The world thought they knew the story, the cold billionaire and his contracted bride. Tonight, they were going to learn the truth.
He felt the shift in the atmosphere the moment Thorn arrived. The air grew colder, the shadows seemed to deepen. The wolf inside him rose, its hackles raised, a low growl vibrating in his chest. But this time it was different. It wasn't a frantic, out-of-control rage. It was a cold, focused, lethal calm. He was an alpha standing on his own territory, beside his mate, and an enemy had just crossed his borders. He looked down at Naira. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. She stood beside him, her head held high, her eyes fixed on Thorn with a look of pure, unadulterated steel. She was magnificent. She was his. And tonight, the entire world would know it. With a single glance, they shared a silent understanding. It was time. He led her from the house, and as they stepped into the garden, a path cleared through the crowd for them. A hush fell over the powerful guests. All eyes were on them. He could feel their curiosity, their skepticism, their pity. They had all read the blogs. They all thought they knew the sordid little secret. He didn't care. The only opinion in the entire universe that mattered was the woman whose hand was holding his. As they walked towards the ceremonial platform, which was set up under the boughs of a massive ancient oak tree, he leaned in close, his lips brushing against her ear. "I never told you," he whispered, his voice for her and her alone. "That first day in my office. The moment you walked in, my wolf knew. It knew you were my mate before I ever did." He felt her breath hitch, saw the surprise and a sudden, brilliant joy flash in her eyes. They reached the platform and turned to face the crowd, to face their enemy. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time in his life, Damon Blackwood was not fighting for power, or for his company, or for revenge. He was fighting for his heart.
She stood on the platform, Damon's hand in hers, a warm, solid anchor in a world that seemed to be spinning. The garden was silent, every eye in their world fixed on them. An elderly alpha, a respected pack elder with eyes as old as the forest, stepped forward to begin the ancient rite. He began to speak, his voice a low, gravelly chant about the moon and the bond, the words weaving a sacred spell in the cool night air. This was it, the final move in their dangerous game. But then a voice, slick with poison and contempt, cut through the solemnity. "A beautiful performance," Marcus Thorne shouted, stepping out from the crowd, a cruel smirk on his face. "Truly touching. But this is all a lie, isn't it? Why don't you tell them the truth, Blackwood? Tell them all about the contract. Tell them how you bought your mate because your own pack was starting to doubt you." A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the guests. Her heart skipped. Thorne's words were a direct challenge, an accusation designed to humiliate them and shatter Damon's authority forever. She felt Damon's hand tighten on hers, his knuckles like stone. She braced herself for the explosion, for the violence. Instead, Damon did something she never expected. He let go of her hand, took a step forward, and looked not at Thorne, but at the stunned crowd, at their people. "He's right," Damon said, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent garden. The shock in the crowd was a palpable thing. Nira's own breath caught in her throat. "It began as a contract," Damon continued, and then he turned, his burning amber eyes finding hers. He was no longer speaking to the crowd. He was speaking only to her. "It began because I was a fool. A man so haunted by his past, so terrified of his own heart, that he believed he could control something as sacred as a mating bond with ink and paper. I was a coward who hid behind wealth and power, and I offered this incredible, brave woman a business deal, when I should have been offering her my soul. Her chest ached with a love so fierce it felt like it could remake the world. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw, public confession of his own flaws, it was a testament more powerful than any denial could ever be. He wasn't defending his power. He was laying his heart bare for all to see. For her to see. He turned back to her, taking her hands in his. The contract is ash, Naira. It was meaningless the moment I first saw you. The only terms that matter are the ones my soul has known from the beginning. His voice dropped to a low, passionate vow, for her ears alone. You are my mate, my partner, my queen. You are the only real thing in my entire life. And she let it happen. He leaned in. It was not the violent act of a predator, but a sacred, tender claiming. She tilted her head, baring her neck, an act of pure trust and surrender. She felt the sharp pressure against her skin, a searing heat that was not pain but fire and light and pure, undiluted energy. It sank into her, a mark not on her skin, but on her very soul, a connection snapping into place that sang with power and love and rightness. In the echo of his voice, a sound tore through the night. A long, triumphant primal howl ripped from Damon's throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated possession that declared his claim to the moon and the stars and every listening soul. It was the sound of a wolf who had finally come home.
Thorn's voice was a predictable poison, and for a second the old violent rage surged. The urge to rip him apart was a physical thing, but then he looked at Naira. He saw the unwavering trust in her eyes, the silent strength she was offering him, and he knew violence was a lesser creature's answer. The truth was his only weapon. He spoke the words, and with each one he felt a decade of ice and fear melting away. Admitting his own flawed, terrified heart in front of his rivals and allies wasn't an act of weakness. It was the truest act of strength he had ever performed. It was an act of liberation. He was finally free from the ghost of his past. He turned to Naira, and the rest of the world vanished. There was only her. Her beautiful, courageous face, her eyes shining with tears that were not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it mirrored his own. He spoke the truth, the simple, terrifying, magnificent truth that had been hiding in his heart all along. Then he marked her. As his teeth grazed her skin, a jolt of pure energy, white-hot and brilliant, shot through him. It was the bond, the sacred, fated connection of his kind, snapping into place. It was a fire in his veins, a song in his soul, a feeling of rightness so absolute it was like taking his first breath. He felt her, not just beside him, but inside him, a part of his very being. The wolf, his true self, the beast he had chained for so long rose up not in anger, but in pure, unadulterated joy, and he let it sing. The howl that tore from his throat was a sound of victory, of possession, of a love so fierce it could shake the foundations of the world. In the stillness that followed, as the last echo of the howl faded into the night, he opened his eyes. He saw the stunned, awestruck faces of the other shifters in the crowd. They could feel it. The raw, undeniable power of a true fated bond. They knew. And then he looked at Marcus Thorne. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pale, horrified disbelief. Thorne had built his entire strategy on the belief that Damon was weak, that their bond was a lie. And in one moment of absolute truth, Damon had just destroyed his entire world. Thorne hadn't just lost the battle. He looked like a fool who had tried to challenge the tide itself. It was over.
The silence was broken by a single, clear voice. The pack elder who had started the ceremony smiled, a genuine, deep smile that crinkled the corners of his ancient eyes. "The bond is true," he declared, his voice booming with authority. "Let all here bear witness. The union of Alpha Daemon of House Blackwood and Matriarch Nyra of House Vance is sealed by the moon and by the soul. As if the spell was broken, the crowd erupted, not with gasps, but with applause and cheers. The mood had shifted from tense skepticism to genuine, joyous celebration. One by one, powerful alphas and their mates came forward, not to offer condolences on a failed power play, but to offer sincere congratulations on a true union. She touched the mark on her neck. It tingled with a gentle, permanent warmth, a constant, living reminder that she was no longer alone. It was real. Through the crowd, she saw two of the other alphas quietly flank Marcus Thorne. There was a brief, tense exchange, and then Thorne, his face a mask of humiliated fury, was escorted away, disappearing into the shadows. He was a broken power, defeated not by force, but by a love he could never comprehend. Damon's arms circled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive rumble meant only for her. He led her away from the party, through a path in the rose garden, to a quiet, secluded bench hidden by a curtain of weeping willow. Here there was only the sound of crickets and the soft light of the moon. For a long moment, they just stood there, wrapped in each other's arms. He gently tilted her head, his thumb tracing the edge of her new mark with a reverence that made her heart ache with happiness. The war was over. The performance was done. All that was left was the quiet, breathtaking truth. "Is it over?" she whispered, leaning her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. He pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "No, my love," he said, his voice full of a warmth she knew she would spend the rest of her life listening to. "It's just beginning."
He watched them lead Thorne away. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just peace. The anger, the need for revenge, it had all burned away in the fire of the marking, leaving him feeling clean, whole. The congratulations from the other alphas were a blur. All he could see, all he could feel, all he could focus on was Nyra. The new, brilliant light in her eyes. The gentle warmth of the mark on her skin that he could feel as if it were his own. The wolf inside him was finally, deeply at peace, curled around the soul of its mate, content for the first time in his entire life. He had to get her alone. He needed to be with her, away from the eyes of the world, to simply breathe in the reality of what they now were. In the quiet of the garden, holding her felt like the most natural thing in the universe. He had spent a decade building an empire of solitude, and now he knew that his entire world was right here, in his arms. She was his home, his future, his everything. When she asked if it was over, he felt a real, genuine smile touch his lips. The cold, ruthless billionaire felt like a distant memory, a character from someone else's story. "It's just beginning," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He had thought this arrangement would secure his empire. Instead, she had saved his soul. He gently took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "Let's go home," he said. And for the first time, the word didn't mean a sterile penthouse or a lonely mansion. It just meant wherever she was.
3 months later, the afternoon sun streamed into the library of the Vance estate, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. The room no longer felt like a monument to the past, but a vibrant, living hub of the future. It was now their shared office, her grandfather's antique mahogany desk sitting comfortably across from Damon's sleek, modern one. She smiled, looking over the final schematics for the new Vance Blackwood shipping fleet. Her title wasn't just matriarch or mate, it was co-CEO. She hadn't just saved her legacy, she had transformed it, merging its history with his power to create something stronger than either had been alone. Her life was full of a quiet, steady joy she had never imagined possible. There were no more performances, no more secrets, just partnership. Easy conversations over breakfast, shared laughter late at night, the constant, comforting hum of the bond that connected her to Damon, a warmth that was always there, just beneath her skin. She had gotten everything she had ever wanted, not by sacrificing her heart, but by finally having the courage to fight for it.
He watched her from his desk, a soft, easy smile on his face. She was magnificent, her brow furrowed in concentration as she made a decisive note on the plans. She was his partner in every sense of the word. She challenged him, inspired him, and completed him in ways he was still discovering. The penthouse, his old fortress of solitude, was now just a corporate office space, a place for meetings. He rarely went there, because this was home. This old house, once a symbol of a world he didn't understand, was now filled with life, with warmth, with her. He had traded his gilded cage for a real home, and it was the best deal he had ever made. His empire was stronger than ever, not because of his ruthless control, but because of the stability and wisdom his partnership with Naira brought. The wolf within him was no longer a restless beast to be contained, but a calm, contented presence, a steady source of strength that was always connected to her. He stood up and walked over to her, his movements silent. He came up behind her chair, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his embrace instantly, her head tilting back to rest against his shoulder. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his hand coming to rest protectively on her still flat stomach, a silent promise of a future they were just beginning to build. They looked out the window together, past the gardens and towards the distant harbor where a massive new ship was being guided into port. On its hull was a new symbol, a sleek B, intertwined with a proud, historic V. The contract had ended long ago, but the real deal, the one for a lifetime, had just begun.